Cathie Wood, she's back and sounding more confident than ever despite the fact that her flagship Innovation ETF is down over 72%. Known as a perma-bull, Cathie made some interesting comments in her latest update to investors with shocking predictions regarding the future of the Federal Reserve. As you may know, in today's market, so much of the direction is dictated by the wording and actions of this man, Federal Reserve President Jerome Powell. With one simple sentence, he has the power to turn the market around or implode it by using words that indicate one of two things: Hawkish or Dovish policy. As we all witnessed in March of 2020, with enough federal stimulus, it doesn't matter what the situation is, a market backed by the Fed is nearly impossible to stop, and even a worldwide pandemic couldn't slow down the growth in the S&P. The market sensitivity to federal policy has never been higher in history. Look at any economic calendar and you'll see that every time a Fed president speaks, the event is marked as extremely important. A 2013 study even proved this by looking at the volatility following Fed meetings. The results show that the release of meeting minutes significantly affects both the volatility of US asset prices and their trading volume. I say this to emphasize the main point. Fed policy is arguably the most important variable in this market, and Cathie had some shocking statements regarding her predictions about the future of the Fed. Now, just before we get into her comments, we start with a bit of history. We know that the Federal Reserve has held interest rates at essentially zero. Now, in order to help fight the high inflation we are currently experiencing, the central bank began talking about raising the rates. They currently have it at 0.75%, and at the next meeting they are expected to push it up by 0.5%. This may not seem like a lot compared to Fed history, and it's not. In 1980, Paul Volcker raised the rate to nearly 20%, but Cathie says this time it's different. She thinks that the Federal Reserve has actually already gone too far. Now, before you call her crazy, let's hear her argument out because she does have a point.
So let's start with monetary policy. So in the last month, the Fed did tighten up. We are now in the Fed funds range between 0.75% and 1%. So from basically 0 to 25%, we have, or 25 basis points, we've now gone, if you use the high end of that range, from 25 basis points to effectively 1. So up fourfold. And the reason I'm giving that as perspective is we are beginning to wonder if one of the policy mistakes here is not understanding that we're starting with interest rates at such a low base that when you quadruple them or go up tenfold, which many people think the Fed will do before all is said and done, so going from 0.25% to 2.5%, that's a 225 basis point increase. That's up tenfold. We've already gone up fourfold. And just hearkening back to the last time the Fed was fighting inflation and ferociously fighting inflation was under Volcker in the late 70s and the early 80s. And I was there. I was just starting my career, and I remember the Fed funds rate was at 10%, and Chairman Volcker at the time jacked it up to 20% in one move. So that was up 1,000 basis points, to be sure. That's a lot, and he did it to shock the economy. But that was only up twofold. We've already gone up fourfold and potentially up tenfold. And just beginning to wonder if, the impact on the economy, starting from such a low rate and having been at low rates for so long, that maybe this is, yes, a shock to the economy.
So basically what Cathie is saying here is that yes, while rates seem extremely low, in a relative format we actually raised the rate significantly. In what is considered the most shocking Fed move of all time, Fed Chair Paul Volcker raised the rate from 10% to nearly 20% in 1980. On its surface, this seems absurd, but we just raised our rate from 0.25 to nearly 1%, which percentage-wise is actually 2 times worse than that 1980 move. If Volcker did the same thing in proportion, he would have needed to take the rate from 10% to 40%. Now, of course, people will attack this argument for a variety of reasons, including the fact that it's a mathematical fallacy. If you start with 0.01% and raise it to 1%, you are technically raising the rate by 100x. But regardless, it's a point worth noting. We see that the market is reacting horribly to this recent hawkish talk despite the fact that rates are historically low. The S&P has been down for most of the year, and a lot of these innovation tech stocks are down well over 75%. At the same time, all that's really changed is the future expected interest rate environment, with most people assuming the Fed will continue to raise rates battling sky-high inflation. This is a massive shift in psychology. Previously, buying the dip has been seen as the default assumption for most of the past decade. The market became one where stocks only go up, conditioning investors to believe in what is called the Fed put, an extremely proactive, under-the-table policy in halting excessive stock market declines with the central bank acting as a form of insurance against losses. Now, investors have lost faith in this new system and truly think that the Fed will choose rates over the economy, willingly putting us in a recession in order to calm demand and reduce inflation. Cathie seems to think otherwise. She believes we're headed towards something investors call a U-turn, where the Fed switches its sentiment, taking a dovish stance on the entire matter. Now, you may be saying, well, this will cause inflation to continue, and that's obviously a very valid argument, but as you will see, Cathie also has a point. Take a listen to her unique argument.
So that's monetary policy. We think the Fed is probably overdoing it. I think that certainly in terms of its intention to go up another 2 or 3 50 basis point increases. The market's railing against that, and it is perhaps because of this very low base that I mentioned in the beginning. We've already gone up fourfold from the low. Still at a fairly low rate, 1% on the Fed funds. But the market seems to be saying that this is more than just letting the markets work and letting interest rates go up. The economy may not, the global economy may not be able to take too much more.
So essentially what she says in the extended clip is that things like M2 money supply and other inflation indicators are flattening out. We have massive inventory buildups in popular retailers, and you see things that were skyrocketing like used car prices suddenly coming back down and flattening out. This to her signals that inflation will come back down to more realistic levels in that 2 to 3% range. According to her logic, the Fed has already gone too far with their tightening, and soon they will be forced to admit this. And while I have trouble believing this theory, there is another side to her story. It may just be that the Fed prefers high inflation over a recession. In Europe, you have the ECB buying up even more bonds, despite the fact that inflation is absolutely out of control. Now, officially, the Fed would never admit to this, but there are plenty of people who think otherwise. The nightmare scenario is that the Fed raises rates and crashes the economy, yet inflation continues its ascent towards double digits. If that happens, this may not be the worst recession since the Great Depression. This will be the worst recession including the Great Depression because it will be accompanied by very high inflation. But the truth is, nobody really knows, and that's what makes markets fun. While we like to think that prices, demand, and supply are all scientific in nature, and to a certain extent they obviously are, there is a massive psychological element to the economy, and humans don't always act rationally. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and as always, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it.